So I'm anxiously awaiting to hear what the question is we're going to play with today because I don't know what it is. Jules get to pick. So what are we talking about?
Yes, I have been going through a few different curveballs that I could throw you. And I landed on one that I thought was really interesting. It's a little bit of a metaphor, which I love metaphors. I think they're an incredible way to tell stories and for people to remember things and understand. And it's actually one of the top ways that I learn and remember and, can advance my own knowledge. So, the question and I'm also kind of curious to hear your interpretation of what this means to you, and then we can kind of go back and forth on how we both perceived this question. So the question is, why and when do we begin to confuse the map for the territory? So I
Mm.
can kind of, if you, I can totally give you the floor and you can let me know how you interpret that and what you think. Or I can jump in and kind of tell you what that means to me, like what the map represents, what the territory represents. So how do you want to do this one?
I'm just taking it in for a second. Well, here's how it immediately hits me. I think the question suggests, territory being distinct as here's the field, an area, various features of it. There may be boundaries involved, that kind of thing. Mapping is routing, like how we may move through the thing. And the confusion may be thinking that the road you're on is the only possibility with all this other terrain that's around you, yet unexplored because we're so fixated on the particular route. I don't know if that's what you intended, but that's sort of at the surface where I took the
Yeah,
question.
that is very much aligned with kind of how I took it. So the way that I see it, from a neuroscience perspective, of course, when I say the map, what I'm thinking about is like our brain's own internal model of what the world is. It is the things that we believe, it's memories, it's predictions, it's the identities that we create for ourselves, it's those emotional situations, our own internal narratives, learned rules, things like that. So it's what we create for ourselves, and it's that model, that map that we are constantly running in our minds over and over and over again. And then obviously the territory is kind of what you said. It is the detail, it is the terrain, it is the smooth ground but also the rocky road. It's that raw sensory input, the real-time environment. Some of it's been explored and some of it hasn't. It's what we're actually seeing and what's unfolding unpredictably every day in real time. And so the reason why I said when do we confuse the map for the territory is because I think a lot of us, both individually and in groups and in organizations, move about them, move according to the map, even if it doesn't match the territory. Because we are designed that way. And not only are our brains designed that way, but society also designs us that way. Like when I think about organizations and when I think about, trying to scale something, we have policies, procedures, standardization, templates that we work within. And we're told to be innovators, but then often when we make mistakes and we messed up, we're penalized for it. So we go back to the map instead of exploring the territory.
Wow. Yeah. This instantly brings me back, and I'm not going to get the particular details right, but one of the interesting phenomenon that has to do with how Africa was broken into its country borders. And it's fraught with problems the way that it's bordered because it doesn't honor the territory at all. And it's like really poor choices based on actually what's in the territory because those borders were set in Europe by a handful of bureaucrats whacking up the map of who gets what, unaware of the territory of Africa. In fact, it was at the time unexplored outside of the coastline. So they were just arbitrarily drawing lines, and then there were the borders, and it broke, families apart. It broke resources apart. It did all these terrible things, just arbitrary lines on a piece of paper that still are abided by, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, for me, it sort of it brings us into that the convincingness of what it is we think we know.
Hmm.
Like how, and maybe I'd love for you to expand on this, but like how satisfied our brain seems to get when it thinks it knows. And the minute like we're convicted on that thing, then even the idea, it's funny, who knows its origin story, but I, often draw the circle of even as an expert in your field, how much do you actually know about that field, right? And it's a tiny little slice, and how much do you know you don't know? And it's like about the same size, tiny little slice of that pie, and most of that pie is what is it? I don't even know. I don't know that's off of the map. And even going back, to that map metaphor, and this, I so appreciate historic maps. Maybe it's my wilderness spirit, but back when we were early exploring, especially when we started going ocean going, when they would draw maps, instead of where it was yet to be explored, they would paint in little dragons and little monsters to indicate that once you go past here, there's dragons out there. We don't even know. So it kind of inspires me to think about, as I'm helping an organization through their pathway to some new future, it'd be interesting to like physically or tangibly create a map and say, okay, well, here's the meandering path we think we're taking, but there's all this other stuff that we have no idea about, and have that sitting on the board could be an interesting thing. But going back to the original thought, why are we so satisfied and comfortable on that map?
There's
Or
so
having
many,
the answer.
yeah, there's so many reasons for it. And I mean, a lot of it just comes down to the resources that the brain requires. And it almost always comes back to we are wired for survival. And the brain is just so incredibly expensive. It requires so much energy. And so we prioritize subconsciously a familiar wrong than an unfamiliar truth. So our brain would rather have that familiar wrong because it can predict it, it knows it, it's familiar, it requires a less energy. But something that's unfamiliar, unexplored, a new territory, a rough terrain requires a ridiculous amount of time, attention, resources, and energy. And so the brain says, that sounds expensive. I don't know if I have the resources to spend on that. So let's just go with the familiar wrong, even if it keeps me stuck here, because at least we know what's going to happen and we're familiar and it's safe. And so, again, like evolutionarily, this is fantastic. It is such an incredible protection mechanism. But when it comes to our modern day, where fuel is abundant, we're not hurting for resources, we have everything we need to survive, we're safe, all of those sorts of things. This evolutionary mechanism has become maladaptive, and it actually keeps us stuck. And it's not that we'll be stuck forever. It's just that most people don't realize that that is how their brain works. And so they continue to follow the map and to assume this is truth. They don't question it. They're not challenged to question it by many organizations or by society. They're often told, well, if you do question it, then you're a conspiracy theorist, or you're just trying to be difficult, and you're labeled all of these things, which then emotionally impacts you. You start to tag your identity as, okay, well, when I question or when I get curious, I'm penalized for it. That feels unsafe. I might be ostracized for that. So let me just go back to my map. Let me just walk that path that I've always walked, because that feels more comfortable and safe. We do it to ourselves internally with our own identity, with our own conversations. We do it in groups, in larger organizations. And I actually, my team met up last week. And one of the things I made sure I told them was, hey, speak up. Do not be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to sound silly or be wrong, because the individual is often a lot more intelligent than the group. Because when you get in a group setting, you have that social aspect of it and you're afraid to be ostracized or to be casted out, and you default to your map rather than exploring that uncharted territory. So it's something that we are very capable of. We just have to make that conscious decision to explore rather than allowing our autopilot and our default to keep us tethered to the map.
One of the Yeah, it's just, I mean, our brains are fascinating. And even, uh, again, in my naive research into sort of the history of brain development, pointed to, a particular argument where one of the greatest leaps we made as a species was in understanding how to densify calories.
Mm,
So raw diet would take almost your entire day to have enough caloric intake to be able to even just exist. And then it was through the cooking of foods and densifying of calories that really ushered in the age of the prefrontal cortex developing, because we now had not only a surplus of calories, but we had free time
mm,
to not be doing things, which brought us to a huge leap. And it's even, sort of fascinating, the evolutionary choices that were made to say, well, we could choose this, but boy, it's going to be costly. And somehow it worked out, right? Even the fact that we can communicate and the choices in how our windpipe and esophagus are arranged, the side effect of our verbalization is choking to death, which happens, right? But that was a choice. Communication was seen as more important to the success of the species. So um, anyway, it brings up a lot of those things. But so, this is it's such a I love the way this is languaged. Here's what I pay attention to. So when we're sort of guiding a client toward a new future, it's always about the story of that ultimate destination. And it's, maybe it's time-based, maybe it's not, it doesn't really matter. But what's the story that is deeply meaningful to everyone that's going to be involved? And then we do that freed of worrying about what the pathway looks like. So we take that off the table so that that thing can exist on its own. And then the pathway is sort of figured out as a recursive conversation over time, knowing that we don't know what we're going to find, 20 days on this path. And we may find it's a dead end. Okay. But what's the process in which we assure that we're making pivots or we're exploring new terrain as things come up? And I call it rigorous discernment, where we take off the table there's a right and wrong way to do this. It's all interpretation. And it's all about examining those interpretations of what's the right move against some sort of criteria to say, is this energy making the difference or not? Are we noticing, progress? Are we noticing change? Or are we noticing other symptoms? And what we do inside of an organization is actually set up intentional challenger networks. So these are, let's say, in a general meeting, everyone's talking about, status or whatever's going on or new ideas. To say, okay, three of you, your job now is to interrogate the daylights out of what we're talking about to see if it holds up. And that process really helps check in to say, wait, what are we not talking about? What are we not thinking about? Here's the things that are obvious to us, but is that actually going to lead us down that path? And what it does, it takes off the table in a group setting the fear of sounding cynical,
mhm.
and it actually gives permission. I have a personal challenger network that they don't even know each other. And I do that on purpose because I don't want them starting to conform their thinking because they know they're in their own
Yeah.
community. They're separate from each other and they beat me up on things I'm thinking about to see if they hold up. And I find that that really frees up the room to, feel safer to say, okay, now we're going to go into challenge round. Because here's the default setting I find in human systems is agreeability,
Oh,
especially with power dynamics. If there's a power dynamic present of any kind, even if we say, oh, we're doing a Kaizen and we're going to remove power dynamics, eh, if I still am less ranked than someone else, my default is agreeability. I want you to like me. I want to be easy to work with. And so I really challenge a lot of leaders to say, are you hearing yeses most of the time? I'm like, oof, well, that's how we convince ourselves that we're on the right path when we may not be.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, so many amazing nuggets there. And I'm trying to pick which one I want to dive into deeper. Um, I think the biggest piece you said to me that like really sparked a little flame was you were saying with these challenger networks, you're creating an environment that feels safe and you're basically giving somebody a role to play. Like it's role play. And what you're doing through that is you're intentionally engineering play in an environment where people don't see it as play, they see it as a task, as productivity, as having a purpose. But what it is really is play. And it is so like play is another one I want to explore in a future podcast because I am so incredibly fascinated by the power of play, especially for adults. But that's what you're doing here. And play is like extremely important. When we think about kids, they don't just play for fun. Play is how your brain experiments in a safe place. It's how you explore the terrain. It's how you get off of your map, but it's in a way that is allowed because you're engineering a situation where it is safe. I mean, if we think about like kids, I'm trying to remember when I was little, like a stick was a sword and the couch was a pirate ship and the floor was lava and we changed the rules every 5 minutes. There was nothing fixed. It was everything that just popped up in our head. And why that is so incredibly important is because it's the imagination, it's the visualization, it's the cognitive flexibility, the exploration, dopamine signaling, neuroplasticity is involved here. It allows the brain to safely operate and create error in a way that is welcomed and in a way that will not be penalized because you're just playing. It's not for real. But you are intentionally engineering that through these challenger networks. The problem is that most of us as adults think play is silly, it's immature, it's unproductive, it has no purpose. And when we stop playing, we stop exploring, we stop updating our maps, we stop remembering what else is out there. And so our maps get rigid and we stop getting creative, we stop getting curious, and we stop flexing all of those muscles, which is why what you're doing with these clients and these organizations by, again, engineering this map and this terrain and expanding what is possible is so incredibly powerful. And that's why you've been so extremely successful because you're tapping into natural brain hacks that we've forgotten about.
You know what's wild is um, the lack of attention on the terrain that's already present that someone's familiar with, but it's not included in the conversation.
Mm.
There's been some long-term research done that suggests that human systems only use about 10% of their resources to listen, and they rarely use them to listen themselves. And so what you've got is, say you've got a larger scale, it doesn't even matter the scale actually, based on where people sit, their specialization point of view, whatever it may be, are deeply familiar with nuances of terrain that have all kinds of resources in them, where leadership may be fundamentally unaware of that knowledge because they're not present in that space. And we see it, I see it a lot where someone's like, hey, there's something going on over here, but like, okay, well, that's a problem. Just stay doing what you're doing and, whatever it may be. And meanwhile, there's this like treasure trove of opportunity that could come from any part of that organization where they've got, in a way, they've got folks that are out there, bushwhacking into new terrain, but the feedback loop isn't there where the discoveries of that train are shared. Well, actually, here's what I see. The treasure is shared. There's nobody listening. And so it's almost like that myopic push toward this one thing we will march on, right? You know, how many stories of demise happen because they just stayed on the path that probably they shouldn't have. But unwilling to hear because it doesn't fit their view.
Mhm. Yeah, and it makes sense why we're unwilling to hear or to listen because what our brain is doing in the background without us even realizing it is filtering the entire world to find evidence of truth of what we already believe in and identify with. And so if there's this thing over here that is great, but we already agreed as a group that we're only walking this path, that the brain interprets that as a potential threat because it doesn't align with the identity that we have set for ourselves or with that ultimate end objective that we have set or with that path that we have laid. So it makes total sense. And this isn't just in organizations. We do it all day, every day. I mean, we create our own internal identities of who we are. We say, like, oh, well, I'm the productive one and I'm the hardworking one. And so you live your whole life as if you are only that identity and you miss out on all these other opportunities for growth because you're not even seeing them because they don't align with that version that you told yourself that you are. Or I'm the anxious one. People that tell themselves, oh, I am anxiety, I have anxiety, they will really, really struggle to find anything else to become because they've told themselves their whole life, like, this is just how I am. It's who I am. I can't get out of it. But the truth is that when you start to tell yourself a different story and you expose it to yourself over and over in various ways with self-talk, with visualization, with little micro doses of exposure to something new, eventually that becomes your new identity. But it is so hard to take that first step to get unstuck that most people think it's not even an option. And I think that's why, um, back to your point, when we lay that path and we set that ultimate objective at the end, we really, really struggle to listen or to hear anything else because it doesn't align with the belief or the identity or the mission or the vision that we have set.
Mm. I have a, in the I pay a lot of attention to language people use, and I always notice like my hackles go up when I hear someone use language that sounds like here's what I am and here's what I'm not. Like for example, I hear all the time, "Oh, I'm not creative. I don't have a creative bone in my
Mhm.
body." I'm like, "That's a story." And
Exactly.
and and so tell me about that story. Why is it that you say that? What is it buying you? Is it buying you safety in not playing and being creative? Is it, what's going on there? And, and even through that, examining my own stories. I mean, there were many, many years that I was pretty proud of myself for never mastering, spreadsheets. I want to live out my career with that. And so I kept that as a story. And what it was protecting me from is the discipline of financial rigor needed to run the business successfully. It was a domain that I wasn't familiar with, and so it was easy to pass it off as, well, I'm just not that, so I don't have to go over there. And then it got to a point where like, if I don't go over there, I'm kidding myself.
Mhm.
Let's go figure it out, right? So, when I think about if I were coaching someone to start to make room for a story that goes beyond the one that they've been telling themselves, that's the first step would to make them aware when you use language like what I am and what I'm not, you're automatically creating a little box to exist inside of. Examine a little bit more about what is that story buying you and what is it you think it's keeping you safe from and what is it holding back? And is it worth keeping that story going? Because, creativity is embedded in all of us. Our unique expression of creativity can show up in any number of forms. I think we've kind of maybe inadvertently taken the creative arena and made it about being an artist, or I should be able to draw effectively, or all these things. I was never, the art student, of course I was, but people say this all the time. creativity can manifest in so many forms, right? And it's, we're all paintbrushes. The canvas may yet to be discovered of where our creativity explodes. So I'm curious about your thoughts on how do we break how do we break that cycle? What are easy practices that just start to almost give our brain self-doubt? Like, oh, there I go saying that again. Why did I just say that? What's this
Yes.
about?
Everything you just said, I'm 100% aligned with it. I think the most important first step in helping us to get unstuck is what you said. You have to become aware. I always say get conscious of the subconscious, which is so weird to say because it's like the opposite. But we have to be aware of the programs that are running in the background. If we are not aware of these programs that we are running, we can't change them. We can't influence them because we don't know what to target, and it's like shooting blindly. So number one, getting conscious of the subconscious. How do we do that? There's a lot of different ways. You can ask somebody else externally to hold you accountable. If tell them, hey, every time I say I can't do this, I'm not capable, I always mess things up, tell me that I'm saying that. Flag it for me when you hear that. So sometimes external input can be really, really helpful if you give somebody else permission to flag that for you. Then once you start to get that external feedback, you'll start to pick up on it yourself. Some people don't need that external feedback. Sometimes once they set that intention of, I'm going to be aware every time this thought crosses my mind. I am going to make a tally on a sticky note every time this crosses my mind. Or at the end of the day, I'm going to reflect and think back, how many times did I have this negative thought today? So number one, getting conscious of the subconscious. Number two, I would say, is questioning that thought. You have to question it. When you question it, you take away some of the power from it. So ask yourself, is this absolutely true? What is the evidence I have for this thing? So let's go with your example of, I'm not creative. I don't have a creative bone in my body. So every time I say that to myself, I'm going to flag it. I'm going to say, oh, I just did the thing. I did the thing. I told myself I'm not creative. Um, so then when that happens, I'm going to say, in the moment, ideally, when that thought passes, is that absolutely true? Am I absolutely not creative? What evidence do I have to prove that is true? And 99.999% of the time, the answer is going to be no, that's not true. And I don't have unequivocal evidence to prove that is true. So then the next step becomes, okay, well, what is true about this situation? And you tell yourself, well, actually, I tend to associate creativity with somebody that can draw or somebody that can paint or somebody that can X, Y, and Z. But the truth is, creativity is not bound to only the arts. Creativity can be the way that I think, it can be the way that I see things. Like, I go for walks every morning with my dog in a park, and I just see these like little images and I take pictures of them, and I'm like, wow, I'm really creative. Like, I had a really good eye for that. It's so many different ways. So that is the next step. After that, we want to start to reframe, to tell ourselves a different story. So instead of saying, I'm not creative, I don't have a creative bone in my body, maybe you say, creativity can look like many different things, and I am creative in different ways. Those ways are X, Y, and Z. So it's kind of a multi step process, but when we get consistent with doing all of those things, and then making sure we repeat that cycle, because the brain listens to patterns, not promises. We can't just do this one time. We have to be consistent with it. We have to repeat that pattern. But once we start to do that, that is how we literally rewire the neural pathways in our brain so that when those negative thoughts come in, we automatically switch to, nope, I'm creative. This is why.
Mm. So I had an interest. I'm curious about your thoughts on this. I had an interesting experience about 3 years ago. So obviously, avid outdoors person, hiking extensively, mountains all over the place, that kind of thing, um, and enjoy just all of it, right? And then this one particular hike, there's a notorious list called the Terrifying 25, which are the 25 most terrifying hikes in New Hampshire, and the White Mountains can be treacherous. And I didn't really think anything of it because I'd never, really had felt any real fear out there. But we chose to do one of them, and it was the second most terrifying of all of them. And it was a what they call a slide, which is an avalanche field, and it's about 250 yards wide, and it's a mile and a half long, and it's between 50 and a 70-degree bare rock face for a mile and a quarter. So I'd never been on anything like that, whatever. And it was no different elevation that I had climbed 1,000 times before. The difference was it was exposed. So I get about halfway up this thing, and I go into full panic mode, like paralyzing, debilitating panic. My mind had a story. It kept telling me not only was I not safe, but that what will likely happen at any moment is that I would be literally airlifted off this thing and dropped in the highest worst part of. That's what this my brain was telling me. That's how debilitating this thing was. And so I had that experience. I worked my way out of it with some somatic techniques and got through. But it came up again hiking the Grand Canyon. But I knew it was coming, right? I'm like, I'm in exposure, and my brain's gonna, and it catastrophizes this scenario that's impossible. It's like if I fell on the trail, I'm gonna just fall right there. But my brain would say, no, if you fall, you're gonna go over here, I'm gonna lift you, and there's metal rusty spikes a mile down, and I'm gonna drop you on one of those. That's the story my brain's telling me. And so the only thing I could do was just like, I'm safe. I'm safe. I had to, divert my eyes and look at the rock fit, all of these things. But still, it's like lurking in the back. It's like the hardest thing I've ever done is just try to wrestle that story away. And I'm still working on it, right? I still find exposure just so I can get more practice at it. But holy cow, I've never experienced anything so powerful. Like I was, we'll say quote unquote safe the whole time. I mean, obviously you fall off the Grand Canyon, you're gone. But um, holy cow, it's so powerful. Like like overriding every sensibility, every bit of logic. Just and like, what's the productivity in that kind of like paralyzing story that like puts you in danger? Like I was frozen. That's not safe. I was that position was anything but safe. Anyway, thanks for letting me ramble on that story, but like I'm curious about what do you make of that neurologically? What the hell was going on there? And am I doing the right thing to try to overcome this?
Yeah. A lot of different things are going on. So you're getting a lot of input from your environment. You're in a new situation that, people have told you this is treacherous, this is dangerous. You hear the story. So that's obviously running in the background a little bit. But what's happening while you freeze is that is a survival response. So you hear fight, or flee, or freeze. So your amygdala is on fire. Your amygdala is saying danger, danger, danger. It's your alarm system. It's shutting off all logical thinking. It's allocating resources to keep you alive, to keep you safe. And one of the ways it does that is by freezing you, telling you just stop right now. We know we're safe in this exact spot right here because we're standing here. So don't move forward, don't move backward, stay right here. While that's happening, the problem is that, to your point, those thoughts continue to compound because you're still in that same environment. You're still kind of experiencing that story over and over and over again. And so the reason this happens is because, your brain is trying to keep you alive. It's trying to keep you safe. It's telling you, okay, just stop everything right now, freeze right here. Don't keep moving forward. We do not know what's up ahead. It could be way worse than where we are now. And it kind of takes us back to that map versus territory. You're creating this map of what you think the danger is, but when you're in the territory, that doesn't match the map. So what you did by implementing some of those somatic practices, by diverting your attention, by looking at things that are more grounding and safe, whether that's trees or listening for the birds or like sensory feelings of feeling the wind or going and rubbing a rock, that can really bring you back to the present moment. It can bring you back in your body. Another thing that I would recommend to try when that is happening is trying to get your prefrontal cortex back online. So look around yourself and say, okay, I see a rock. Let me try to name 5 things that start with R.
Oh, interesting. So,
Yes.
okay.
So you literally challenge your brain to do something random like that. And what you're doing by doing that is you're having to activate the prefrontal cortex. So let's say 5 things that start with R because I just saw a rock. I'm going to say radio. I'm going to say, oh my gosh, see, right now I can't even think. Richard, rich, or I don't know. I can't even think of anything. But when you try to say 5 things that are with R, that struggle that I'm having right now, I'm trying to engage my prefrontal cortex, which takes energy away from the amygdala, which is what is causing you to freeze and to stay stuck in that spot and to continue to play that scary story of where the map does not match the territory. And so, doing all of those things kind of in tandem, obviously slowing down your breathing, telling yourself, I'm safe, I'm calm, I'm prepared for this. Um, and then getting that sensory input and intentionally activating your prefrontal cortex, you're literally hacking your brain to take energy away from that fight, flight, or freeze response. And you're bringing yourself back into the present moment. You're allowing your logical thinking to come back on board, which will help you then continue to move forward, not in that state of like severe panic.
Mm. And, I find that is a powerful allegory for what can happen not in an environment where you're on the side of a mountain, but when you're in the face of that struggle in your life, right? Of any kind. Like I'm on this path, and either there's all this other territory starting to get hints about, there may be something to it, or I'm on a path that doesn't match the territory. What the hell am I? All that coming. I'm kind of curious, in your life, like moments where that you discovered that the distinction that sort of were life changing for you.
Yeah, I I think a big one. So I grew up playing elite sports. I was a former professional athlete, and I think this comes up a lot in sports because when you're at such a high level, it's your job to perform. It is your job to, you know, do well on the pitch. I played soccer, and so I would tell myself stories all the time, especially once I got to college, because I competed in the most competitive conference in the country. And I used to I never struggled with anxiety up until this point, never had panic attacks, but I remember my first ever panic attack because I was telling myself a story that wasn't real and I had convinced myself that it was true. And it completely took over my body. I started getting heart palpitations like every other day, sweating, like just couldn't sleep, waking up in the middle of the night because I was telling myself this story. I was repeating it to myself. I was visualizing it. I was imagining what it would feel like when this story comes true. How am I going to handle that situation? And I didn't have these tools that I have now to, question that thought, to find evidence of why it actually isn't true, to reframe it. I didn't have those tools. And so I lived in that story. And the story was silly. It was, I'm not going to start the next game because the coach doesn't like me. But at that point, soccer was my entire world. And to me, starting was life or death because that was the story I told myself because it was my job. I was on scholarship. I had to perform to keep my scholarship. And if I didn't, then I was at risk for losing it. And it is something that I learned in that moment of how incredibly, and I revisit that often, but it is so incredibly powerful. The stories that we tell ourselves become our reality. They really do because the phrase perception is reality. That is absolutely true. Whatever you perceive, whatever you tell yourself, whatever you believe or imagine becomes your reality because your brain doesn't know the difference between what you actually physically experience and the story that you are telling yourself and visualizing in your mind. Your brain doesn't know the difference. So we can use that against us to keep us stuck on those old maps where the territory doesn't match, or we can use it to propel ourselves forward. We can use it to like explore that territory. We can use it to say, okay, well, I was operating on the map and I was only staying on the map. But the truth is, there's a beautifully safe territory that can help me get to the next level. I'm going to visualize exploring that. I'm going to tell myself a new story of that exploration, of how great it's going to be, of all the lessons I'm going to learn. Sure, I'm going to fail along the way, but every failure is feedback, and feedback helps me take that next step forward. And I'm going to expand myself beyond what I even imagined was capable, something that the map never even had on it, because it cannot ever have the amount of detail that the territory has. And so that was a really tough lesson for me to learn. But now I'm so incredibly grateful for it, because even though it seems really silly, something as insignificant as starting a soccer match really set the foundation for my ability to understand how powerful the stories that we tell ourselves, the map that we create, and then the territory that's waiting beyond it.
Mm. Do me a favor. How did it turn out? Did you
So
start the next game? Like, don't you the cliffhanger?
I started, and I it was like just such a ridiculous story. I did not have the greatest coach my first 2 years. He was, he not great. I'll just leave it at that. But I started, and it was totally fine, and I performed well. And it just like makes you realize how silly it is in hindsight, looking back. But in the moment, it feels like everything. It feels like it is life or death. And I just remember that moment. Like, I can close my eyes and I can see it. I remember exactly where I was. I remember what I was wearing. I remember where I sat down when I had to call my mom because I was literally having a panic attack. And I look back on it now and I'm like, who cares? So what if you didn't start? But when you're in that state, just like you on the mountain, when you're in it,
Oh,
it completely consumes you and you cannot see anything beyond it. And that again just speaks to the power of the brain and the brain's bias towards survival. It will completely wrap you in this thing because it thinks that it is keeping you safe. But in reality, when we have the foresight and we have the awareness to help ourselves step out of it and almost treat it like a lucid dream where we are watching ourselves, like we remove ourselves and we're watching ourselves at the same time, that is where the power comes, because we start to take away the energy from that intense moment. We step back a little bit, we start to see the forest from the trees, and we say, that's actually not reality at all. That is the perception that I am creating. And I have the option to choose and create a different reality.
mm. Yeah, it's amazing the power it has.
Oh my
And even
gosh.
on that mountain, right? The minute I got into tree cover, I was 100% like it was never there. I was, jumping around, doing my usual thing, just like having a blast. The minute I felt my brain was like, okay, that switch shut off. It's just
And not
incredible. And like it
only,
never happened. It's like,
yes, yeah. And not only like does it have a like not only is it mental, obviously, like it feels paralyzing, it feels completely overwhelming, but a lot of people that experience this day after day repetitively, like they have worse health outcomes because they have physiological responses. Like it is very real. Our brain responds to it. Our words that we tell ourselves, like this is a repeated theme, the language, the words, it's so incredibly powerful. I mean, you've probably heard of this study where they took two plants. They got the exact same amount of sunshine, the exact same amount of water, the exact same amount of nutrients. They had one group of people talk to the plant negatively and another group of people talk to another plant positively. And the plant that was talked to negatively did not thrive. It started to die, it got brown, its leaves withered, and the plant that was talked to positively actually grew and it thrived. that is exactly how we are. Our words are not just words, they are chemical signals to our brain that completely influence our physiology, our outcomes. And that's why chronic stress is the number one predictor for nearly every disease, because it is so incredibly powerful at either influencing health or influencing like disease. And it's, most people don't realize it. They think that it's just, oh, think positive, like you're just a tree hugger or what. No, this is actually very scientific. There's so much behind it. And it all comes back to being aware of the stories we're telling ourselves and the maps that we're operating on.
Something's coming to mind for me again, doing it more intuitively without this deeper nuance around the neuroscience behind it. So I tend to talk about these journeys. Right? We're using this metaphor. Map and territory. There's all this territory, whether we're aware of it or not, rich with detail and surprise and resource. Yet, we carve out a path because we need to walk something to make progress. When I check in with teams as they're sort of walking the path that was the best known path at the time when we started the walk, is not just to talk about, okay, well, what are we doing? What have we done? But okay, tell me about the experience we're having. How's it
Mm-hmm.
feel? Does it feel heavy, right? Are you dreading certain things? Those are really powerful indicators to say, maybe just a little nudge, to the left or the right, using the map metaphor, could change the experience. Maybe there's something missing in our ability to, carry the resource needed or what I find happens almost all the time is when things start to feel heavy is we've been thinking about it way too much and not acting on anything. Nothing's been put into action, right? It's like it's been meticulous thoughts before action took place. I'm curious, to even unpack that. There's a like almost like a bias toward let's meticulously like plan the path, and then of course surprise, right? And we never take any action. And then there's this satisfaction in the action, but why is there so much fear in taking the leap of taking the first step, where we just stay ruminating about the thing, which we know just eats us alive?
Yes, I love this, and I actually a few weeks ago put up a video on my Instagram exactly about this concept, about how actually over planning is one of the best ways to sabotage your
Yeah.
progress, because over planning, over engineering something, getting so hyper fixated on something, again, it actually activates the threat response. It puts on your blinders and it prevents you from taking that next step forward because you're so consumed by this thing, by planning, by making it perfect, that you miss all of the other opportunities that sit outside of that thing. And so there's a lot going on here, but the biggest one is just that it triggers a threat response. And so the part of your brain that you're activating actually keeps you stuck in that. It puts on your blinders and it reduces your ability to think flexibly, to process things quickly, to critically think. And so you don't even have the ability to recognize that you are stuck because you're still operating out of panic, out of fear, out of I have to be perfect, I have to plan, I have to be organized, all of these things, and it just keeps you stuck right there. But when you create a really loose structure and you say, okay, I know what I want to feel like, and I'm taking this from you. I know what I want to feel like. I know what success would feel like. Now, what do I think my best first step is? Let's just start there. And there's no fear and there's no potential danger in taking that first step because it's small. And
Mm.
it's like, I can go back. If that first step doesn't actually get me in the direction I want to go, then I'll go back and I'll take another step in the other direction. And I'm safe because I didn't over plan. I didn't create too much of a structure that would allow me to take the wrong path right away because the map is territory is wide open. And so when we create that rough idea of, what is this going to feel like? What do I want others that are on this journey with me to feel like, to experience? What do I think my next right move is? And let's just take a couple small steps in that direction. And if I find out when I'm on that path that this isn't quite it, it's not a big deal. I go back and I try the other one. Um, I think a lot of people have shame and not having a clear plan and not being over engineered and not being over organized, because a lot of society, a lot of organizations say the more organized, the better, the more documentation, the better, the more clean you are,
Yes.
the better. And so we get consumed and we get socially engineered to believe that that is the only right way, that our map is set in stone and that's all we can do. But when we, like, I just love how you always talk about, like, what do I want this to feel like? What do I want others to feel like? What would success feel like? That just creates so much more room for so many more opportunities and the ability to explore that territory, that we unintentionally close off for ourselves when we, operate the way that we're told is the right way.
You know what's funny? I just realized. So my wife and I have a really interesting dynamic when we're, let's just keep on the hiking thing. We hike together all the time. She's like the queen of the side quest. She's like that. I've never done a side quest that I didn't love, right? And I'm much more about let's get to the top, right? And I'm like, I get into grind mode, and I'm just like, let's get up this thing. And I'm like, we don't have time. What? It's a quarter mile down. What? We don't even know what's down. Let's just keep going, right? This is what the. And it's so delightful because now I just surrender. I'm like, yeah, let's go check it out. And it's always this amazing thing. And every time we do it, it creates an experience where we actually get to experience what we're doing, not just be driven to, hit the goal, hit the deadline. And the common side quest is if there's any water, how do we get into it, right? And just like
Love
let's take our shoes off and put our feet in the water. And I find, I think this is really special, but that dynamic, it's almost like you want to welcome that dynamic. And it's kind of funny because like I have one particular dynamic which is needed, right? Because it allows us to move forward. And then there's this other dynamic which is also needed because it's about what kind of experience do we want to be having, and are we even having an experience, or are we just like sweat fest up the thing? And it's when two of those things are present where you get this beautiful, and then we both count, like I count on her to draw me into that experience, and then she counts on me to just okay, we're going in freight train mode because we got to, get there before the sun goes down kind of thing. It's really powerful, beautiful, but it was never so clear as the way you're describing it as
Yeah.
map versus territory thinking. One is about making progress, the other's about exploration. Like
Yes.
what if
And
you, and you can have both. You can have both.
both are so incredibly important, and you need both. You need to have that end. Like, I'm not somebody that likes to set goals per se, because I like I want freedom. So I always say I set objectives. I set something that I know what I want. To your point, I know what I want to feel like. I know what I want to experience. And when I see people setting goals, that represents an endpoint. Okay, well, we hit it. Now what? Now what do we do? But when you set objectives, or objectives for an experience, you continue beyond that. It is the journey. It is not a destination. And what you're describing here is both of that. You have the map. You have, all right, like, I know what I want to experience, and what I want to experience is the peak because it's beautiful and all this. But within that journey, there's so many side quests to also explore and to experience. And that is just so beautiful that you guys have that together, because again, both are incredibly important, especially when it comes to business. Like, we have objectives for the company. We have something that we know we want to achieve, but that's not our end point. There's so much to explore within that and beyond that. And so I just love that you explained that story. And I love that, like, this entire conversation has been a nature metaphor, because I'm also an avid hiker and explorer and adventurer. And one thing I love about my fiance and I and our dynamic is we're like very much the same way. I tend to be like, all right, we're doing a 9-mile hike. Like, let's go. Like, I'm so for it. Like, I'm an achiever. I love to achieve things. And he's like, just so childlike, where he's like, let's look for salamanders under these rocks. And I want to find some arrowheads because I used to do it with my grandfather. And we will just like take a path off the side and play and have fun and explore. And then I'm like, all right, like, but we're on a mission here. Let's go. Like it. So we have a very similar dynamic. And again, both are so necessary. And if you were missing one, you wouldn't get the full experience.
That's there it is. You
Yeah.
know, yeah. So many times the side quest's view is so much better than the top.
Yes.
And I'm saying that metaphorically. But also like being mindful of, okay, what do I want to do or get to, and how do I want to experience the journey? Invites us to be able to create those moments that has the journey worth it, right? So every journey is going to be fraught with struggle fest, right? There's going to be moments where you're in the darkness and you're worried and all these kinds of things. But what makes it worth it is, but then there's those moments of extraordinary experience along the way that make it all worth it. Like one of our favorite things to do after we do some tremendous journey hiking is to hang out together and just unpack the stories. And we actually have a hiking journal we keep where we have all the anecdotes of all the adventures. And there's always some crazy, yeah, we may talk about the view and the terrain, but what we really talk about is the ridiculous things that got talked about or, events that took place. All those kinds of things are what make like that the story of the experience is what makes the journey so rich, even if the journey was a struggle fest.
Yeah. And something beautiful you just said was the dichotomy of both. Like it is both the most incredible thing and extremely difficult. And I think when we like go through life, and this is so hard, and I'll give a little bit of an example, but we tend to, again, use language to label things as bad or as good, or negative or positive,
Yeah.
or dark and light. And while they are, seemingly opposites, both are so necessary because quite literally, if there was no dark, we would have nothing compare it to appreciate the light. If there was no struggle, we would not appreciate the beauty because we would have nothing to compare it to. So it quite literally, the beauty would not exist without the struggle because it would all just be one blob. And so, like, something my family is going through right now, my older brother has two kids. So a little boy who's going to be 4, and a little girl who will be 2 in September. And the little girl, her name is Nova. She has a super rare congenital heart defect. She's had multiple I think 6 open heart surgeries to this point, and she needs a really serious surgery in a few months that could be absolutely devastating. We don't know. Basically, the doctors are telling us to prepare, spend as much time as possible. And something that is so incredible that I'm observing through my brother, through his wife, and through their son is they are appreciating both the darkness and the light in this situation. Like they are recognizing that the darkness, like the heaviness of this situation, has such a clear purpose, and it allows them to appreciate the time so much more if they didn't have it. And while a lot of families, I'm sure, would be completely consumed by this negativity, they are thriving right now. They are exploring so many things. They're experiencing so many things together. And it is like incredible to witness and to watch and to observe. And so I think like circling and tying this all the way back to map versus territory, the map is not negative and the territory is not positive. They're just two inputs that we need to be aware of, that we operate within, and to understand that there's so much more beyond what we tell ourselves that we are capable of, that whatever the story is. And it translates on so many other levels throughout life. It's like a fractal, it is everywhere. And we just have to be aware of that.
Jules, I think we should just end it right there. That was incredibly well said. I was thinking, I'm like, how do we bring all this together in some way? Like, yeah, that's it. They're just there.
Yes, they're
And
just
so
input.
question them, be curious about them. They're not cut in stone, and there's so much we don't know. Wow. Wow. Okay, good one. Well, we'll see where we go next, but anyone, please like comment thoughts on this, your own experiences of it. Just weigh in on what we're talking about. Just curious about everybody's receptivity to what we're sharing, but also like, what do you see in all this? So we'll be ready to record the next one soon.